I knew her before I knew her because I read all of Jonathan's. I still have 30 seconds to tell jokes and self-facing stories. And he wouldn't. I cruised through my doctoral coursework, and then he made me write 11 drafts of my prospectus. And so he even said to me before Rosh Hashanah, he said he's going to ask God for forgiveness for doing this to me. Number 11 worked out just fine. It was published by Oxford. It was a happy ending to the story. But I needed to read. I even think, what does a successful Jonathan Snyder dissertation look like? So I downloaded all of the Jonathan Snyder dissertations, and I studied the architecture.
What was your topic? What was your field?
On religious authority. I studied how the bad behavior between shul presidents and rabbis in the 19th century. Fabulously.
So you're
very
like most historians.
I have a PhD in Lashon Hara and for slang. I tell the news very.
Janet,
Sure.
before I pass it over to Janet, I just want to remind everybody that we do record these, so don't worry, they're in the back, your faces aren't in it, so if anybody's got a problem, let me know, but, yeah, nobody will see your face. Janet?
Okay, so I'm Janet Michelson Variahu. I'm the head of the programming committee for the board of the Bala Cynwyd Library, and it is my pleasure to present my friend, Dr. Zev Eleff, Rabbi Dr. Zev Eleff, who has his PhD in American Jewish History from Brandeis University and his rabbinic degree from Yeshiva University. He is now the president, the 12th president in its history of Gratz College, and we're very, very lucky to have him as a neighbor of ourselves and of the library, and his daughter is sitting here to help sell books when we're done. But what we're going to discuss is Zev's latest book. He has his previous book is Authentically Orthodox and Tradition-Bound Faith in American Life, which is fascinating. This is probably of more general interest. Was it your wife who said you need to write a book of more general interest?
I'll tell the story.
Yeah, we need to know. It's dyed in crimson. I can't wait to read it. Zev Eleff.
All right. My pediatrician from 37 years. My kid's a pediatrician now. I was born here. My parents met at Penn. This is like really a homecoming for me in the last year and a half. It's been great. Really, really great. It's true that this is a different type of book for me. I'm a scholar of American religion. My expertise is in American Judaism. I've written on Reform, I've written on Zionism. My book before then was on Orthodox Judaism and lived religion. And my wife, not when Mital was born, but when her younger brother, Jack, was born, we went to a store. It's not much frequented anymore. You may never have heard of it before. It's called Barnes & Noble. And we were right off of Route 4. We walked in any gift certificate from my grandfather to buy my little baby a new book. And Melissa took a look at what was there and said, "Why can't you write a book like this?" So that stuck with me for Jack's age. So it stuck with me for quite a while. COVID came, and I worked for a nonprofit, so there were a lot of meetings. I had regraded my backyard, and now it was time to do a book. It was my sanity book. And I've been collecting for a long while about a story, and I'll explain exactly how it came to be. One story that I like to tell is when it went out for review. When you publish in University Press, they will send to two reviewers usually. So there were 2 reviews, and it was a really nerve-wracking thing. I know how to write about American religion. I know how to write about Jewish studies. I wasn't so comfortable writing about the history of American sport in relation to American religion. And so I was really nervous. 2 reviews, the reports got back to me. The first one had never heard of me. The editor smartly submitted the manuscript to a historian in the kinesiology, I don't know who it was, Blind Review of American Sport. This reviewer responded, "This book is fabulous, publish it, no corrections needed." The other reviewer, apparently from the field that I'm ensconced in, American Judaism, American religion, writes as follows, and I don't even actually have it in front of me, I know it verbatim at this point. "I am deeply familiar with all of Eleff's previous writings. I can therefore, with great authority, report to you this is far and away the worst thing he has ever written." We got a third reader to balance it out. Thank goodness they offered a lot of suggestions, and hopefully, I don't know who it was. I don't have the audacity to ask who it was. Hopefully that reviewer will agree that because of it takes a village to publish a book, the referees came in and it's a better book because of that criticism, and thank goodness he developed a thick skin in academia. The story I'm going to tell today is football is the arena, bit of a cliche, to talk about the history of openness, history of pluralism, the idea of making it, and the challenges that folks on the periphery face, and how in some very idiosyncratic, interesting way, the periphery does have the opportunity to influence the mainstream in American life. Football was born in 1874 in Canada. American football was born in Canada. I should say it's no spoilers. We've taped Melissa Clapper's Jeopardy! There's some people in the room who know what happened. I want to find out on my own. Here's the scene in 1874, and the idea of warfare and masculinity of young men, those in the red, the darker shirts are the crimson, football crimson. They're playing against McGill. Harvard claims they won. There's no real record. McGill claims they won. We don't know exactly. Based on the economics and scale, it made good sense for Harvard to adopt Yale as its chief rival. But this is where football was born, with the very notion of masculinity and warfare being at the forefront of it. Harvard doubles down on football. By 1903, Harvard builds this horseshoe stadium. You can still see it. It's in Allston, Massachusetts, across the way from Cambridge. This is Harvard Stadium. It is the very first modern-day stadium in American life. You can see it's reinforced with metal and cement. It is this horseshoe. It is the very first thing, and it is what by the beginning of the 20th century, Harvard is part of the big three. Harvard, Yale, and Princeton are the incubators of college football. There is no such thing, as we'll see, in professional football, that the NFL begins in 1920. But before I get to the sort of the protagonists, and they're really two in my story.
Can I tell you to move to one side?
No, so I can see. Bill Bingham. I want to begin with him. Bill Bingham is a mill hand in Lawrence, Massachusetts. He is a first-generation American. He is the son of Irish Protestants. He attends Lawrence High School, night school. That means he does not get to compete in the Lawrence school sporting events. Instead, he is at night school. He's a mill hand by morning. It's still by daytime rather. Still today, Lawrence has these labor mills, helping his family of 8 make it. He's part of their economic sustainability plan, in essence. And so he competes on the YMCA. His sport is he can't play football. His younger brother plays for Yale. But Bill Bingham is he's seated. He's not Roy Welton, who is crouching down on the right. Roy was actually playing the Olympics, racing the Olympics in England in 1908. Bill Bingham is on the right. And through sport, Bill Bingham, first generation American, as a mill hand, graduates with $23 to his name. He is able to matriculate to, still today, one of the great New England prep schools, Exeter Academy. Their chief rival is Andover, and he never loses. Bill Bingham was the greatest schoolboy runner in New England and probably in American history until he got to college. But he was the great champion of Lawrence, Massachusetts, and he figures deeply into our story. He eventually comes to Harvard. He's seated beside the manager of the team. He's in the middle with the H. handsome looking guy. He's got it made. And he would have been a world beater, so the journalist said, if not for this fellow, Ted Meredith, as you can tell, he has a peak in there. He's from Norristown. Some people, when they see Norristown on 76, they say they're really, really close to Costco. I say, that's where Ted Meredith was born. Ted Meredith was also a kid from the periphery. His father was a dairy farmer, and he was laying bricks until somebody found him and said, hey, you're pretty fast, Ted Meredith. And because of my friend Bill Bingham and his loyalty to Exeter, and the fact that he was voted first marshal at the Exeter commencement ceremonies in 1912, he had a conflict. Bill Bingham was invited to compete in the Stockholm Olympics in 1912. But he didn't want to, because he had so much affinity and friendship and camaraderie at Exeter and Lawrence, Massachusetts before then, he decided to skip the Olympics and he would participate as first marshal in the Exeter commencement ceremonies. Well, that left the space open on Team USA, and that was filled by Ted Meredith. Ted Meredith won gold. And that was, he in some ways, therefore, Bill Bingham created the myth of Ted Meredith. And Bill Bingham, who never lost in the Lawrence YMCA, he never lost for racing for Exeter. He crushed Andover to the delight of the Exonians. He could never beat Ted Meredith. And we'll get there. And so when he graduates Harvard in 1915, he's forlorn. It's all about winning for young Bill Bingham, and so he exiles himself to Paris, Texas. He actually fights as he's a medic in World War I. He lands in France, but he travels to Paris, Texas. He's going to make it on the ranch. He had some friends that he would visit at Harvard when he was an undergrad there, and he exiles himself for the time being. So let's leave Bill Bingham there for a moment. The thrust of the story, we've really gotten into this, so I'll be a little bit autobiographical about how I got into this, is the Harwin family. Before I come to Philadelphia, I was in Chicago. There's only one leather company around in Chicago. There's a curious reason, and very much related to the story why Harwin Leather Company is still around. In 1893, Isidore and Rose Harwin, they are engaged to one another. Rose has family. Rose comes with her entire family, but she has distant cousins living on the west side of Chicago. And she and her fiance and her entire family come to Chicago, Illinois in 1890. 1893 was the Columbian Expedition, the World's Fair. If you've ever been to Chicago, you will know about the Ferris wheel. Ferris wheel was invented. Mr. Ferris invented it in 1893. That's not the same Ferris wheel. They went through different stuff. That's part of the World's Fair. It's a major moment. There's this major moment for women, and at that moment, there's this world's religion. But for Isidore Harwin, he is absolutely transfixed by one of these makeshift buildings that displays leather. You see, Isidore Harwin was an orphan, and his mother raised chickens. I live in Bala Cynwyd, so I dutifully have also started to raise chickens. But his family, his mother and his sister are egg farmers. Doesn't make so much money. No, it doesn't. Eggs didn't cost that much. And so he's sent to apprentice with a tanner who specializes in what's called cordovan leather. Here, I have to learn a lot for this book. You know, when you think you know something, then you read a book and you realize you know nothing. It's quite humbling. Cordovan leather is a very particular type of hide. You have to bury it in the ground. You have to be very prescient and bury it in the ground for about a year. There's all sorts of chemical processes that are involved in it. Suffice it to say is that Isidore Harwin, as a young man, apprentices for a tanner, a very special type called cordovan leather. And so when he looks at the Eisendorf leather collection in 1893 in Chicago, he mutters something to his buddy in Yiddish. These people don't know anything about tanning leather. What he didn't know was Mr. Eisendorf was right behind him. But like any good manager and owner, he said, young man, who are you? Isidore Harwin, a man over there, apparently according to family lore, responds very politely. And Eisendorf invites him to come see him Monday morning for a job. Fast forward to 1905, and Isra Harween has been elevated to foreman, and he is ready to leave Eisendrath happily. Actually, he becomes Mechutanim is the Hebrew word. His son Arnold marries Eisendrath's daughter. And he goes out on his own. He starts, still on Goose Island right now in Chicago, he starts Harween Leather Company. It's the only one to this day. There's a very fascinating reason, but I want to spoil it right now, why it's in existence and why the others have folded. And he starts to make it. And when you make it at the beginning of the century, the way to show, to demonstrate you make it is you move further north. How do you know in any immigrant population is you move further away from downtown? And so he does, he moves to the northern suburbs, and he and Rose, who are a part of the Self-Culture Club. This is the history of Chicago Jews, which they are mentioned. Self-Culture Club, they studied things like the Declaration of Independence. They read Emerson in the original form, and they read the Cliff Notes. They studied what it meant to be American. To this day in Harween Leather Company, they have the letter that Harween dutifully autographed, acknowledging that he has separated himself from the Tsar and he is adopted. It's not his citizen papers. It is a separate document. I hereby renounce obedience to the Tsar, and I support George Washington and his disciples. And they're a part of they don't go to synagogue on the whole. What do? Their religion is America, and that's critically important for them. He still has a certain allegiance and affinity for supporting Jews and social welfare. Here is from the Chicago Tribune. Chicago Jews give $744,000. That's a lot in the beginning of the 20th century. And among the donors is I. Harween. Now, if you're immigrant Jews and you want to make it in America, one of the great institutions in American life is, of course, Harvard. Here is Eddie Mahan, who Jim Thorpe claimed was the greatest football player of all time in 1950. Here is Percy Howard on the bottom left, and here is the aspiring future Harvard star, Ralph Harween, the first of Isidore and Rose's two boys. He desperately wants to go to Harvard, and they enroll in Francis Parker, which is the style of John Dewey, who was at the time, he just left the University of Chicago, was very involved in progressive education. And sure enough, Ralph is the first graduating class of Francis Parker in Chicago, and he does, in fact, matriculate to Harvard College. He's a brilliant fellow as Ralph. He's argued cases, becomes a lawyer, he argues cases before the Supreme Court. Arnie is a bit of a slacker. He doesn't achieve as good grades, but he's a terrific football player, as is Ralph. Here is from the Parker Weekly. As has been announced before in the weekly, Arnold Harween is to captain in 1915. Next year's football team, Harry Zander will, of course, be the business manager. With such a parent ahead, our football team should be better than ever, provided he has the support of all of the school. Until Arnie Harween arrived, Francis Parker, though it's in its nascent stage, still around today, it's a very important private school in Chicago. They weren't very much known for their sports. Here's his yearbook photo. And you see text a little bit small, but you see nature's best gifts. It's about Arnie Harween, the giant's brain, Superman's brain. He will make his school famous, and he does. He gets to Harvard, and he gets to Harvard amid very significant nativism and anti-Semitism. This isn't from Chicago, but just to give you some of what was going on in terms of anti-Semitism in the early 20th century, a kosher Xmas spirit, keep Christmas Christian, buy from Gentiles only. A hint of the Hebrews, this is a depiction of Coney Island, which was infested as the political cartoon of Jews at the time. And so he's coming to Harvard, the great center of Boston Brahmin Calvinism, amid this American culture. And boy, does he deliver. In 1919, Harvard triumphant over Yale. That was a big deal. Still a big deal, but it doesn't see these banner headlines in the Boston Globe you see any longer. Harvard triumphant over Yale 10-3. Eddie Casey from Natick, Massachusetts, a Catholic boy, another first-generation American, dashes for a winning score. And here's some of the report. Much to do over Casey. How did the Jews report it? Jewish advocate, Harween brothers trying for Harvard. Domestic news, Ralph and Arnold Harvey, sons of Mr. and Mrs. Isidore Harvey of Chicago, Illinois, were in the midst of the toughest scrambling at the Harvard-Yale game last Saturday. Apparently, Eddie Casey doesn't make it into the Jewish press, but these two football players, two brothers, at one point, Ralph was the oldest living NFL player. Ralph and Arnie get much of the credit among American Jews. After all, he uses terms very often that scholars do, Americanization. Part of what my book tries to make an argument for. Different cultures Americanize differently. Take Irish Catholic, for example, who found Notre Dame and Georgetown and Boston College. They create parallel systems. We don't want our boys and girls to go to the public schools. They don't read the same Bible that we do. We want to create our own parochial schools. We don't want our boys, most times higher ed is mostly a boys' club. We don't want our boys to be admitted into state universities or into some of the elite private colleges. We want our boys to go to Notre Dame and beat the snot out of those Protestants at Harvard or Yale. That is a very Irish Catholic form of Americanization. The Jewish form of Americanization says, no, we don't want to create our own systems. We want our kids to succeed. If you're in New York, you don't send your kid to Talmudical Academy. On the whole, you go to Stuyvesant. You don't want to attend Yeshiva College, which was founded in 1928 for the most Orthodox besides. Go to City College, go to NYU, go to Columbia if you could be admitted. There were quotas at the time. The Jewish form of Americanization was to demonstrate success by entree into traditional American institutions. And that's why they would sell it. That's why Eddie Casey doesn't exist in the Jewish rendering of the success of Harvard in 1919. Who's who of college athletics? That's Arnie Harwin, received the top billing in the American Hebrew. Remember, this is the only other Jewish athlete that people ever heard of is the boxer Benny Lennon. So Harwin receives top billing in his day. No collegiate sport calls for getting recognition. Football is very important. Football is about discipline, strategy. It's warfare at the time. Americans can't get enough of that. And so football has all of the trappings of what we expect out of American masculinity. Some people take umbrage. Another member of Who's Who in Athletics, somebody takes exception that Arnie gets all the attention. A fellow in undergrad, Isidore Brown, points out that there are some athletes and Jewish athletes at Syracuse that deserve some attention from the American Hebrew. But it's Arnie Harwin, over his brother Ralph, who receives much of the attention. He's a bruising halfback and an attacker, and apparently very good defender in boots. Western contemporaries are making much of the statement that in Harvard-Yale football classes this year, two Jewish boys, Ralph and Arnold Harvey of Chicago, contributed mightily by their brilliant playing to the triumph of the red, crimson over the blue. That's Yale. We have ceased keeping tab on the Jewish lads who are making the varsity teams in the various branches of college athletics. You say that, but we are aware, of course, that certain coaches may be somewhat prejudiced against Jewish boys in their squads because coaches are not apt to look for athletic material among them. These boys, on account of their proverbial athletic stock, must show their mettle before they get their chance. On the other hand, it's important. We are equally aware of the fact that no coach will jeopardize his chances for a victory because he does not like a boy's face or name or religious belief. The gentlemanly culture of participating in sport has been replaced by this period for the quest for winning. Success is by this time interpreted, this is the era of Henry Ford, of wealth, of trying to quantify success. And in sport, it's less about the gentlemanly culture of fair play at a regatta, and now it's about winning. And now that Harvard, with the help of Percy Houghton, who is the coach and the so-called Houghton system, a regimented program of bruising, rushing, and running. No, there was no throwing in Houghton's system. It was about winning. And Harvard was finally, after decades of struggling against Yale, had proven that they too can win. Back home in Chicago, Jewish brawn, right? Again, it's trying to be supercilious and trying to point out ironies of certain expectations and caricatures of Jews. Jewish football players are coming to the fore. The recent triumph of Harvard over Yale on the gridiron is a tribute to Ralph and Arnold Holman. In any case, Two Jewish students whose hometown in Chicago, as a result of his prowess, Arnold Harwin is mentioned inexplicably for the Harvard captaincy next year. In Harvard Yard, the cultural pecking order is coach of Harvard, captain of Harvard, president of Harvard, president of the United States. That is what is important at Harvard, that a Jewish kid, not named Cabot or Lowell, is in line for that position is a very big deal. Before he does that, though, Harvard, against the advice of the faculty, President A. Lawrence Lowell, who understands fundraising, he's invited to something called the Rose Bowl. Still around today. It was the only postseason game. It was positions the best team of the West against the best team of the East. Harvard was undefeated in Harwin's first varsity game. He's a junior. Varsity season rather, he's a junior. They had only tied against Princeton. Princeton apparently played very dirty. And they are invited to the Rose Bowl. There were a lot of alumni at Harvard in California, and this was a great fundraising opportunity. The faculty objected, are they going to be able to produce in their studies? In the end, fundraising won out over academics, even at Harvard. And Oregon 11 bows to Harvard, 7-6, touchdown coming on a dash by Eddie Church. A. Harwin, in the sub-headline, his goal is to point out the touchdown. Gives Crimson margin of victory and wonderful struggle before at 30,400 at Pasadena in the Rose Bowl. The Rose Bowl had been suspended because of World War I. Woodrow Wilson had suspended all football for those couple of years. As it resumes after a 2-year hiatus, it's Arnold Harwin who was one of the heroes of the Rose Bowl. Not a very Jewish refrain, but here's one of the students writing a postcard to his parents. He brought home the bacon, as you may have noticed. Harvard beat Oregon. A. Harwin, captain of Harvard. I'm sure it was pressing. Arnold Harwin in 1920 is elected coach of the Harvard Crimson. He once again has his second season as varsity player. Arnold Harwin doesn't lose. He has a 10-1 record. Again, tying Princeton. Again, they played dirty. Here he is. It's Arnie Harwin for the team photo. He's in the middle, holding Harvard beats Yale 20-0 in 1920. A big deal. You only got your H. You got your H on your jacket only when you beat Yale. Is it breaking down? The Jewish press is all in on Arnold Harwin. This I'll start to summarize a little more, so I want to make sure we get to everything. But they look at, to outsiders, this may be a matter of negative interest that Arnold Harwin, a Jewish kid, was elected captain of the Harvard Crimson. But it goes on to say it means that in Harvard, at least, the anti-Jewish pro-fraternity spirit has received a blow. The idea of marginalizing Jews, A. Lawrence Lowell would, in a couple of years, install a quota to lower the Jewish population of Harvard from 10% to 5%. That wouldn't happen for a couple of years, but that was very much the spirit at Harvard. And Arnie became a household name in his time. Here is a speech delivered on the concept of the Jewish Center in a very reputable book by Israel Goldstein, the rabbi then of Bnei Jeshurun, still around today on the Upper West Side of New York. The physical department may have suffered. We may have hampered the development of a future Benny Leonard or Arnold Harwin. It was expected you knew in the 1920s who Arnold Harwin was. And this is how I discovered him, and I actually took it at face value. This is Louis Newman, a reform rabbi who tries to start something called a menorah university. You never heard of it, although very kindly the president of Brandeis writes a letter to Newman in 1948 explaining that his plan came to fruition with Brandeis. But in the 1920s, Louis Newman tried to break past the quotas by creating Menorah University. Didn't happen. And one of his pitches was to combat the quota. The quota will be kept down to its authorized fraction. Did Harvard realize when it introduced into its questionnaire, the interrogation, this part's true, has there been any change in your family name? That its football captain of 1920 would have been compelled as an applicant for admission to say that though his name was Harwin, his nom de ghetto had been Harwitz. Now I quoted that as a given in an article that I published in 1912. Shame on me for not thinking about it too deeply. The quota system does not appear at Harvard until 1922. Harvard had graduated 2 years earlier. So this story is a myth. It's not true. In fact, we have the manifest of Isdar Harween's when he disembarks in New York in 1893, and he was Harvard back then. There's no truth to this, but the impulse to make something of a household name like Arnold Harween and to create energy and synergies about it it's very telling for the role that Arnold Harween played in the American Jewish imagination. Now, Arnie does change his name. See here. Here's the Chicago Tribune. When Arnie graduates, Ralph stays on to get a law degree at Harvard. They both return to work for Isidore, in the leather company. They return in 1921. By then, the National Football League had started 1 year prior, and one of the two teams in Chicago, besides the Bears, were then the Staleys, was the Chicago Cardinals. Now they are the Arizona Cardinals. If you know anybody there, if they wouldn't mind trading DeAndre Hopkins to Baltimore Ravens, I'd very much be appreciative. So leave it at that. And their best players in the National Football Hall of Fame is Captain Patty Driscoll, quarterback of the Chicago Cardinals, will appear in a new role against the Akron Indians, very Midwest, very working class. After all, who would play on a Sunday? There was no disability, there was no insurance. Who else would lay themselves out for a couple of bucks on a Sunday afternoon other than working class Americans who would take a chance and who like to play rough and tumble football? It was Patty Driscoll, Normal Park, gridiron at 2 o'clock this afternoon. Patty has shifted his base of operations to left halfback. He has moved. I promise you have to know much about football. He's nice to say he's no longer the quarterback. He's behind the quarterback. He's the rusher. He's the running back. Why did he move there? Making way at quarterback for a guy named McMahon. Some Irish Catholic on the south side of Chicago, one thinks, right? McMahon for former Harvard ace. Well, that's strange. Harvard didn't admit too many McMahons. Who the heck is this guy? Well, we know. Plays as McMahon. And here's a little side story in a different publication. The Harween brothers, so after they returned from Harvard, they still had that itch to play football. The Harween brothers went to the management of the Cardinals. We want to play, they said simply. And who might you be? Queried their superstar coach player, Patty Driscoll, formerly a star at Northwestern and of the Great Lakes training station team. Who might you be? Well, I'm Arnold Harween, and this is my brother Ralph. Good Lord, gasped Driscoll. Not the Harweens. Why, that's fine. We'll play you up. Why, I've got newspaper friends. I know you won't, said the Harweens, and they explained. We'll be McMahon. He did change his name, just not the way that it was interpreted by Newman. We'll be the McMahons, they said. We want to be anonymous. Apparently, Rose told them, I worked too hard for you to besmirch the family name by playing the seedy thing called professional football. Others contended they didn't want to besmirch, they didn't want to sully Harvard, Gerald Harvard's name by going as the Harween brothers. We'll be McMahons, they said. We want to be anonymous. You don't want publicity, and you don't want a whole lot of money. The leather company had made a good deal of money back then. You do want to play football, and play football they did. They even win the championship game in 1925. Before we get there, a little side story about how Harvard Leather Company exists to this day. Well, as A. McMahon, Arnold, and Ralph as B. McMahon, they even got some of their other Dartmouth friends to go in as C and D McMahon. The Cardinals were all McMahons. None of them were Irish Catholics, but they're all McMahons. Arnold apparently was a very good running back, but he wasn't very fast. He was a great tackler. And the coach, player, owner of the Chicago Bears was George Halas, who had retired and unretired like any good Chicago athlete many times. But one of the times that he retired, George Halas was tackled in the open field by Arnold Harween. And when he got up, he realized that Arnold Harween had caught up to him and tackled him. He said, I'm hanging up my cleats, I'm done. This time, apparently that was the last time that George Halas played football. They maintained their relationship. Why is that important? Because there was a sporting goods company, you may have heard of it, it's called Wilson. Right? Tom Hanks made them very famous. in Castaway. And they were based, still are, in Chicago. Well, the football at those times was kind of like an ostrich egg. It was very much experimental in the early 20s. And the Bears their Bears practices is where those early NFL teams practice with new experimental footballs. And they practice with a lot of them. Well, in order to make new prototypes, it was important for Wilson produces, to this day, all of the footballs. You don't own, we'll get to that in a second. They needed to get leather very quickly and produce prototypes of football to practice at Chicago Bears football games. And Harvey Leather Company, by virtue of the fact that he was the guy who summarily ended George Halas's career, to this day, they are the provider of all leather to Wilson Sporting Goods. So if you own a baseball mitt, not from Raleigh, but from Wilson, it has not quarterly quality leather that you have to get the shoes. If you have a mitt, or if you have a football, if you have a basketball, and it's leather, it comes from Harvey Leather Company. And that is exactly it. It's precisely the reason why they are still in business and no other leather company is around Lake Michigan. Harvard realized to show you the big horseshoe Harvard Stadium, just so you understand how big business football is. Here is the budget items, the income, the revenue for Harvard sports. Baseball in 1927, 50,000. Basketball revenue was just 2,000. Fencing makes $150. Look at football, $830,000. Football is big. It still is big business. It certainly was even in the early 20th century. Here is a ticket for the Harvard Young Games, actually the last one that Arnie competed in. Well, ever since Arnie graduated, Harvard was on bad times. Percy Howden, their famous legendary coach, had since retired. He actually retired before the Rose Bowl, and his coach, Bob Fisher, after working with the players that were recruited in the first place by Howden, he wasn't much of a coach. And so it's very apparent by 1925 that Fisher has to go. Details of Fisher's retirement, and they need a change. We put Bill Bingham in the parking lot, right? So he's returned by 1923 to coach track. He's left Paris, Texas. He comes and he's the most affable guy. He's always been warm to people. He's gotten over his self-banishment because he couldn't defeat Ted Meredith. And in 1926, Harvard makes him the very first athletic director in all of college sports. And his first role is to replace Bob Fisher. And who does he choose? Arnold Harwin, Chicagoan, to lead Harvard. Son of Russian Jewish immigrant. Now this is the guy who got Harvard alum, went to Francis Parker, but the newspapers are seizing on his Jewish identity. Arnold Harwin, a Chicago boy of Jewish descent, is how the lead article begins on the front page of the Chicago Tribune, not the Boston Globe, Chicago Tribune. Son of immigrant comes out of West to coach the Crimson, and here is Bill Bingham and Arnie Harwin talking to one another, and he's hired. Here they are together, youth in saddle at Harvard Athletics. The idea is there's a major article that the athletes, it appears in 1923 in the alumni magazine of Harvard. The players don't like to play anymore. It's the peer pressure, it's the expectations of you have to play, you have to give up your years and play football in order to get your job in Wall Street, in order to go to Market Street, or wherever it is. And Bill Bingham appoints Arnold Harwin. They hadn't met until 1926 with this spirit of youth, of giving sport and fun back to Harvard collegians. So Alumni Magazine, the selection of Arnold Harwin to be head coach of the Harvard football team has been universally commended. Not really universally, we'll see it. We have no doubt that he will be an excellent coach. While in undergraduate, we learned thoroughly the so-called Howden system, which was then the theme of the story. And since that time, he is absorbed by observation, playing, and coaching the theories and practices which have grown up in the Middle West. They threw the ball in the Midwest in an aerial attack, very progressive ideas of football. Here is Henry Pennypacker, who, besides being the director of admissions, who was the lieutenant to carry out the Jewish quota in the 1920s, was also on the committee to find Harvard's next football coach. He writes a letter to the search committee. He is busy doing recruiting in Chicago for Harvard College. Dear friend Moore has at the Harvard Club luncheon here this noon. A very strong plea was made. For the consideration, thank you, of Arnold Harwin as head coach of football or failing that as associate or assistant coach. He has had much successful experience both in playing and in coaching. He, in the championship game, he coached and played for the Chicago Cardinals, but coaching the Cardinals, a professional football team here. And these men say that he is only half Jewish. His mother being a Greek. That's not true. Rose was through and through Jewish. And Pennypacker learned that. And so that letter appeared January 26, 1926. This comes 2 weeks later, February 3rd. Since writing you from Chicago, he's now in Houston. I have spoken with a considerable number of men in this part of the country, and I am really doubtful if we could expediently invite any member of the Hebrew race ethnicity to become head coach, no matter how skillful he might be. There is a settled feeling, apparently very widespread, that we must do something at once to check certain growing influence, and that Harwin's appointment in the present ticklish situation would be perilous. And some anti-Semitic cartoons that appear, and this is Percy Houghton. Houghton is a very Harvard-sounding name. And here is some anti-Semitic tropes. So first of all, we'll get rid of that. The notion that this Jewish guy with this long, very pronounced nose in the cartoon, he's going to throw out all of the good old Harvard traditions when he becomes coach in 1926. Not everybody. Some people are very excited about the advent of Harvard's system to replace the Houghton system. And some people were deeply scared, not just because of his Jewishness, but there were actually 3 strikes against Arnie. Here is Amos Alonzo Stagg, the University of Chicago head football coach, who was very much against professional football because getting paid to play was somehow anathema to the spirit, the gentlemanly culture of American sport. And in the conference, he's referring to what now is the Big Ten, we have drawn the line as sharply as we have known and have made him eligible for any coaching position anyone who has played for hire. Anybody played the seedy thing called professional football. That alarm is not extended to the East. Arnold Harwin has become head coach of the Harvard squad last fall. Played professional football under the name McMahon on the Chicago Cardinals up to the time of his Harvard appointment. And he's also a Midwesterner, writes the Washington Post, worried about his job security at Harvard, where they do newfangled things that are somehow against the tradition of Harvard. He's bruising and running. We'll see in a moment in footage. I have these cockamamie ideas of passing, and we'll see here, this is what today is known as the quarterback option. We invented it, essentially. Another type of pass, which was developed at Harvard by Arnold Harwin for this type of play, is the two-handed toss from over the shoulder. This pass is probably more difficult to master than the straight push pass, but is very effective when perfected. Bear with me. Here's Arnold Harwin about to trample on the Pilgrims. Have some footage. This is Harvard Stadium. You see, these are his formations. That's a running play that this is the play that he invented is right there. The quarterback has given it to the running back, and he's created what is today known as the quarterback option, very popular in college sports, as well as now in the professional league. He's not very successful in 1926, but again, he's not recruiting any of the players. He's dealing with Fisher's recruits. So 3 and 5, and most inglorious of all, always at the end of the year, they play Yale, and he's lost 12-7. In 1927, he's a little bit better, 4 and 4, and he's shut out by Yale, 14-0 at Harvard Stadium. 80,000 forget this will season end as Yale and Harvard clash. Harvard-Yale game relegated to a rear seat. Bingham declares football a success. Why? Game has been given back to the boys. They like to play again, win or lose under Arnold Harwin. Athletics for all. Here's Arnie teaching his charges how to do the quarterback option. Harwin rates highly with Harvard night. Harvard the most important at all. So he still does count. Harvard stops Albie Booth, who's in the College Football Hall of Fame, and defeats Yale 10-6 in 1927. Harvard is jubilant. Players are dying. Director Bingham urges Harween to return. They're off. He's independently wealthy. Go back to work for the mill, for the leather company, whenever you like. As team celebrates and disbands for the spring season. Harvard in 1928, they're 5-2. You see, they're 5-2 because they really raised the ranks. Who they lose to? They lose to Army 15-0, and they lose to Penn 7-0. Penn is very, very good in that time period. 1929, they lose a close game to Michigan. They're 5-2, and they lose what is the other one? Dartmouth. Dartmouth has a very good squad. They're 5-1. And then in 1930, in this final season, they're 4-4, but still 13-0 for Yale. So that's a 4-4-1. That's a tie goes to Harvard on that season. By 1930, Harween is ready to leave. Harween's achievement at Cambridge was to repopularize football among the players. The idea of knowing about being on the periphery and influencing the mainstream, that's the theme right here. To repopularize football among the players, to make them like the game. Eddie Casey was his assistant coach, the guy who really won that game for Yale in 1919, is believed to be an ideal leader to carry on Harween's policy. In his speech at Harween's goodbye banquet, Bill Bingham, Arnold Harween will be remembered by the present generation, and I hope the legacy will be passed on, because of his human attitude to the boys and to the game. Not once during his 5 years of coaching have I seen him lose his temper on the field. Never have I heard him swear at a boy, nor have I heard him make an uncomplimentary remark about an opponent. And Alice and Danzig were in his time. Alice is the man's name. The New York Times, the lead sports writer in the Times in 1930. He has a full profile. Player of the game, Arnold Harween. Loves the game and associations. But Arnold Harween, it's the New York Times. This is not, I didn't have to dig deeply into the bowels of some, regional newspaper. This is the New York Times. But Arnold Harween is one coach who never has been concerned by the possible cost of defeat. He has taught football not because it is a science, but for on the contrary, his work at Harvard has meant a financial sacrifice. He has taught it because he honestly loves the game and its associations, particularly the associations with the young men who sit at his feet and who have come to have so high regard for him and so deep appreciation for the wholesomeness and the sanity of his methods and outlook that they sign petitions to keep him in harness and cheer when he smilingly capitulates to their demand, as he has done for the last 2 years. He stayed at Harvard. Arnold Harween is so much bigger than victory. His type is so priceless, an asset to the game, particularly in this period of charges and countercharges, that one cannot but hope that he will be persuaded once again somehow to stay in the pigskin game a little longer before returning to the leather industry. He doesn't. At 1913, after what is considered to be Harvard's last successful football campaign, I'm very sorry, he leaves and he goes, and to this day, the leather company is run by Skip Harvey, who was born Arnold Harween III. It's still in family hands, but he leaves the game. What's interesting, and I'll close with this, in the Jewish syndicated papers, Our Athletics, by Henry Lance. So this version appeared in the B'nai B'rith Messenger as far away as Los Angeles. Louis Brown, to send more dope of Harvard athletics, an interview with Coach Arnold Harween would sit well. The very columns in which the American Jewish community is clamoring for more information about Harween's retirement, 2 columns later, Henry Greenberg, first baseman of the Raleigh Club of the Piedmont, you know him better as Hank Greenberg, has been recalled by the Detroit Tigers. Couldn't have known it. I'm not saying there would be no Sandy Koufax or Hank Greenberg without Arnold Harween. What I am saying is that Harvard no longer known for the football crimson anymore, and the rise of professional sports over college athletics is truly the reason why, for probably all of you, I am reintroducing Arnold Harween, who in his time was a household name. He was a household name at first because he crushed Yale, and he won the Rose Bowl, the one and only postseason victory in Harvard Crimson history. But for a long while, why did American Jews and people along the periphery adore Arnold Harween? Because Bill Bingham and Eddie Casey had shown something very profound about the American experience, that even at Harvard, the periphery make a deep impact on the mainstream. Next slide.
Questions, anyone?
Don't want to keep anybody.
When they built the stadium at Harvard, the first concrete erected stadium, everyone thought it was going to collapse. And they had to hire people to stand underneath the stadium during the game to prove it wouldn't collapse.
Fascinating. The picture I showed for people was from an architectural magazine. So by that time, by the time that they had depicted it, they were pretty sure it wasn't going to collapse. But certainly, but it was, to your point, it was a new thing to have it. It was a deep expense. The president, Charles Eliot, at the time refused. He was a big opponent of football. The earlier story, more well known about Harvard and football, are the clashes between Charles Eliot, who wanted to condemn football and rid it, and this other person named Teddy Roosevelt, who happened to be one of the more powerful people in America at the time, actually summoned Charles Eliot in 1905, 2 years after the stadium was built, and a bunch of other football aficionados, and the result of that meeting was the founding of what's called the NCAA, and the invention of the forward pass. It wasn't legalized before.
How come the Kennedys didn't become a Notre Dame family?
It's interesting. The Boston Pilot, which is I don't think around anymore, but is the Archdiocese of Boston's newspaper. They clamor by the 1930s how the Catholic stock are no longer playing for the Rockies and others in Notre Dame, Boston College. So there is sort of a widening of it. But being a senator, there's certain other expectations. Kennedy was asked, who will you follow if there's a debate between the Pope and the American people? So that might have actually betokened what his father thought about Harvard versus Notre Dame. I don't know. It's a good question. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. This was fabulous.
Tell us selling it for,
Yes.
yes.
So there are books to sell, and you'll be willing to sign them for payment?
They go for better on eBay. If you sell it without I'm happy to do it.
That's great.
Thank you all for coming. It's great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.